Right then folks, this is why you've got to be careful if you're in the forest or woods where there's high winds. Take a look at this one here. Prime example of a widowmaker. It's resting in that top canopy as you saw, but you look at that trunk. You'll actually see it moving. Can you see it moving there on film? That's going to go, and you don't want to be anywhere near it. There's possibly 4 or 5 inches of movement in that whole tree. Well then guys, welcome back, and you find me doing a bit of a recce in a woodland that I know of, but I've never been in. I've been in on the opposite side of the river, same as a lot of the woodlands around here, and the one on the opposite side is beautifully kept. It looks like it's not used for anything other than just basically walking and enjoying, owning a woodland to yourselves. It is well managed, well kept, and stunning. But I would say you wouldn't get away with a wild camp in there, quite simply because it looks like, you know, whoever is managing it is doing it for no other reason than just to the sheer pleasure of owning a woodland you can walk around in. And I would say they're doing it, you know, very often if you're putting in all that time and effort. On the opposite side of the bank and basically on the land running up from it, totally different game, totally unkempt. A lot of it is going back to bush and scrub, so it's obviously a different landowner. But in here, I'm guessing because it looks like nobody comes, I could probably get away with an overnighter, so I'm just recceing it at the moment. Now there are some older trees in amongst it, but a lot of it's new growth and like scrub coming through and young hazel. So this was possibly looked after at one point, but it's just being left to go back, you know, pretty much to, well, not, I wouldn't say woodland as it should be, because it's just going to clog itself up and inherently stop decent growth of other trees. But I'm hoping in amongst all this, and it is a higgledy-piggledy mess to be honest with you, I will find somewhere that I can do a wild camp. So let's just push on down through. Now there are tracks here actually. There's tracks, and they're going down through there. They're deer tracks, they're deer hooves I would say, pushing into it. You can see behind me. Yeah, and it looks like there's been a bit of, in around that tree there, the deers have been rooting around that little young tree there. Yeah. So we do know there are deer in here anyway. The river's down there, but I want to scour the bank down here to see if there's any obvious crossing points, just to make sure whoever does own that all up over there isn't coming in over on this side. You know, better safe than sorry. Well, not sorry, but you know, if you've set up camp, you don't really want to have to then pack up and go. I mean, the reason I'm doing this recce is quite simple, you know, to avoid any unnecessary questions and things like that. You know, at the moment, I know very few people are going to be around, because who would want to be out in this weather? But boy, look at that old oak tree, and you can see a lot of the limbs have come off that one. That is some years old, that one. So I've got to the bottom down by the river, and I can clearly see there's an indication that the river forks off into 2 branches either side of the hedge. There is a boundary fence or wire along it. I don't see no obvious crossing points. So I would say they definitely are split, these woodlands. Whoever owns that really nice piece isn't coming in here. And particularly with the amount of water going down through the actual river, you wouldn't be crossing unless it's further up, but I'm going to check that out. But yeah, it's very steep. I don't think I'm going to find anywhere too easy to set up a overnighter, but yeah, I think I'm safe to say this piece here, you know, isn't going to be used by anybody. Now I do understand for a lot of people doing recce's might not be practical time wise and things like that, but for me I would rather invest a little bit of time and then not have to deal with any repercussions afterwards. At the moment it's easier for me to just say I'm just having a little wander and you know, depart when I'm asked to leave the leave the area. But if you've got your camp gear, it just becomes that little bit too awkward to kind of say you're just having a little wander. You can see the river up there and it branches off here. There's wire fencing running all the way along this bank here, and I'm not seeing no signs, like I said, that you would cross over. On the opposite side you can see a gateway going into a meadow, and I do know where that goes, and you can see the track that goes along there. They have a lot of downed branches in there at the moment, but I've got a stream this side, and on the opposite side there is quite a sizable river. You just can't see it at the moment. Right, I'm just going to walk up through here now and to scan the banks. It's a bit easier to see how the river forks either side of this hedge. And you can see on the right hand side it's running faster and deeper. Right, I'm looking over to the opposite side, and that fresh windfall from possibly, I don't know, a couple of weeks ago has been freshly chainsawed up, so there is activity on that side. Obviously not over this side, but it's something to bear in mind that people will be I already know there will be people over there, but what I mean is there'll be people over there working, so that could be during the week as well, weekdays. Now I'm actively scouring the ground. I'm looking for evidence of sporting use, like shotgun cartridges and anything of that sort of paraphernalia, just to give me an indication of whether, you know, this side is used for sporting use. I'm not seeing anything at the moment. As I go further up here, you come to a very steep overhang from agricultural land. There's nowhere here that's on the level, but I think I could make something work. I could possibly hide behind one of these big trees, but I just don't like some of the limbs. The limbs on some of these old oak trees, they're not looking special. So you'd want to be out the way of that. I can see a track running underneath that there, but it's not going to be human, because unless anybody's prepared to stoop under there all the time, that's probably deer. But and where a human would go, I'm not seeing any activity of ground being kicked up or scuffed, boot marks or anything. Now I am actually following the trail, and I'm hoping it'll lead me just a bit further away. I mean, the actual track people would be walking on is now getting to the point it's like 200 to 300 meters away. And if this V's further to the left and that goes further to the right, I could be in a better secluded position. You can see the deer's hoof marks here. You got one indentation there and another one side by side as it's sunk into the mud. This is well worn as well. One issue I'm encountering here, which is this particular whole valley is really wet and damp. I suppose you could argue it's typical of the northern hemisphere. Once you start going down into valleys, you do hit watercourses, and on top of that, it's going to be damp. I mean, it's probably a given, but I do know of others that I do enjoy using, which you really have to be down pretty much by the river before you hit sort of like damp ground. But it's so steep here. Yeah, you can definitely see the water there now squidging out of the ground. Well, when you're in like pretty remote places like me, this is one reason you do recce's. Imagine stumbling around this in the dark trying to find a place. That's my hiking stick there. You can see where it is in this here. It's just all turning into a bit of a boggy mire here. I'm going to have to seek slightly higher ground. But let's get my hiking stick out and I'll show you. And it's stuck there, like, here it comes. It's all gloopy. So my stick was down to that there. Put that onto me. That would be this pocket here. It's well above my knee. Now it might seem a little bit of a laughable subject, but if it's dark and you got in here and you some of these bogs, you just would not be able to break free. You'd be up to your, you know, knees, even your ass bum, and there you'd stay till you got some help. You're wandering around the countryside willy-nilly, particularly areas you don't know. You know, it can be a bit of a risky game. So I'm going to backtrack and get to some slightly higher ground. Although you would think I'm down by the river, I'm a good possible nearly 300 meters up a hillside now. Well, I've just left that slightly lower elevation, and behind me you can see where the fields begin, and you can probably see the fence line. And as you can see behind me, it's a sea of dead bracken. Now, when this bracken comes back, you wouldn't want to be camping up in this. We've seen there's hundreds of deer tracks around here. This bracken is going to be full of ticks. So, you know, throwing a bivvy up, you're going to wake up in the morning covered in ticks. I'm glad I did a recce on this, because I could easily waste a lot of time stumbling around before darkness trying to get a camp. Yeah, it's not looking too promising, to be honest with you. Anyway, onwards and upwards to the fence line and try and get past this boggy bit at the moment. Well, this is the first evidence of shooting. Number 7 shot. So that's, I would guess, pigeon or rabbit shot, or what they would use for it. And I've just come back through that bracken, and there are thousands and thousands of rabbit runs there. So somebody's been after these rabbits. Although saying that, you know, this cartridge has been here for a couple years, I would say. Unfortunately down there it's just too much of a slope, and the flat areas are just too close down to the river where people on the opposite side would get to see you. Yeah, so far this is looking like a pretty poor option for a wild camp, or an enjoyable one anyway. And this is one of the reasons I always say do a recce. Right, I'm going to head on out of here, and I've got to go basically down and then up, because I came down to avoid all this brush, which basically I'm going to be pushing through now. I don't want to go right the way down to the river, and basically I'm going to head back into a bit of commercial woodland, or a massive piece of commercial woodland. There's a lot of options to wild camp in there, and a lot of good options. So this may be somewhere I come for a little look-see, you know, when we get all the bluebells and everything like that out. But as for a wild camping area, no, it's of no value to me. Further down there's a few bits of ground you could use, but you potentially are going to be overlooked and spotted. Up here is of no value, and further along it's too boggy, and near the bracken it looks like it's potentially used for rabbiting. So yep, let's get out of here. I've just found a jawbone here. It's sun bleached, it's been here for a while. I'm just scanning looking for the rest of the carcass. I can't decide whether it's sheep or deer. I'm not a bona fide tracker expert, but it's a plant-eating animal, I can tell that much. But yeah, I'll let you have a look. You might know, it might be one of you guys out there who might know. Well, there you go. My initial thoughts is deer because it's so high on the hinge. A sheep is more straight back through, I would argue. But hey ho, yeah, it does look like deer, I'm guessing. But I'm looking around and trying to find the carcass to fully identify it, but there's nothing else I can see. Out of interest, there's a blackthorn thicket there, and it's pretty much advanced, and it's been there for a little while. I'll let you have a look. Yeah, it's not somewhere I'm keen to go myself, because I think I've explained before that I'm allergic to blackthorn. You know, if I get pricked by the thorns, it's pretty much a guaranteed one-way trip to hospital, a few hours or 24 hours later. But I'll go as far as I dare. Right, we're coming up to it now, and yeah, you can see it just looks like a horrid tangled mess, and it is in all intents and purposes, and it's just full of vicious thorns moving around here. You can tell it's blackthorn because of all these little white flowers. If I can catch them, obviously we're at the wrong time of day. If I get up here, you see those? That's blackthorn. And just look at those thorns. They are absolutely murderous. Thing is, they break off and stay in your skin, they do. Well, it's a different day. My phone packed up in the middle of that video as I was extracting myself out of that piece of woodland. So that's another clear example. If your phone packs up, you don't have a clear understanding of the area you're in, or any of the routes to get out, or potential secondary routes to get out, you could come unstuck if you're using your phone simply as your navigational aid, and you don't have a full understanding of the ground you're actually in or on. Yeah, so that's another plus for doing a recce. You don't have to get all military when you're doing a recce, by no means. At its basic fundamental core, you're just basically having a look in advance at a potential area you're going to. If nothing else, that's all you're doing. And you can take it as far in depth as you want to go. And, you know, you can even find out through HMR Land Registry who owns the land, you know, surrounding land. You can actually go and source out different tracks, routes. It's endless how deep and how far you can go into this, but you cannot understate the fact that doing a recce beforehand will give you a better peace of mind and ultimately a better wild camp. But I do understand a lot of the fun is just tipping up and doing it, and I've done many myself, and I probably still will do one or two. But ultimately, the best camps I have are the ones I've pre-planned. I understand the area, the location, and on top of that, I have everything that I want and need planned up here for that particular wild camp, due to the fact I understand the location. So let's backtrack to the beginning of this video and let's do a little bit of analysis on it and see what basically I can deduce from that very quick recce. First off the bat, the location, coming into that location, you would have seen those telegraph poles, and from that I could deduce, due to small bits of signage, there was very small bits of signage there, and clearing and work that looked to be happening to give those cables clear access, taking some of the trees that may be overhanging away from them, that I could potentially expect workmen to be in those woods during particularly working hours, and basically, you know, that might even stretch into weekends. So I've got that to consider. On top of that, further on, we did find those widow makers, and there was a vast number of those in that single little area, and that's on one of the routes into the location we went. After that, getting in, I then found I had to go over a stream and over a hedge, and if I had a Bergen, it would have been, you know, doable, but it was just going to be uncomfortable. Negotiate a fence, and then I was straight into deep brush. And I did also notice there was a sty to give access from the fields into this piece of woodland, which doesn't show up on any satellite imagery or, you know, maps. So, you know, I instantly learned people were using that piece of woodland, even though I initially thought it might just be overlooked, you know, scrub woodland that nobody or the landowner was just not bothering with. Then, as we moved down through, we could see we were having, you know, difficulty in the fact, for a wild camp, there was no level little plateaus or nothing like that. It was steep, and obviously we ran into the bigger trees, which had, I would guess, hazard a guess, they were probably between 250 and 400-year-old oaks, and a lot of the limbs were in poor condition. So where there was any ground you could use, you had vast spider's web above you of possibly not safe branches. You also then had to factor in, being that far down towards the river, you had you know, easy viewing over to the opposite side of the river course, to the other bank or side of the valley, but ultimately they could obviously see you. So that kind of obviously takes away the viability of using that piece of ground by those oaks in itself, by the fact you're in full view. And even if you tried to hide away, if they were walking dogs or you were cooking or had a little campfire, you would more than likely be spotted. We then noticed it was heavily populated with deers, lots of deer runs. That might not matter too much, but ultimately, yet again, we could possibly be pretty safe to say deers would be transporting ticks. And ultimately, you know, as I pointed out there was a big ferned area. Even if you went up into that and tried to push through that to try and find a location, you're going to end up being covered in ticks. Now, I might be making this sound all negatives, but initially my first overview on this piece of woodland, looking at it from the opposite side, down over the valley and through maps and satellite imagery, I thought I was stumbling on a forgotten little gold mine for my own personal wild camping heaven. We then also found some of the routes that you could possibly try to get further into the deeper part of the thickets were boggy, and basically the ground was so steep the water was literally coming out 200 yards up the actual hillside, and it wasn't all down in the valley by the river. The whole hillside there was potentially just a big mire and bog. and that would possibly be, you know, unpleasant and unsafe this time of year. But in the hotter times of the year, when it might be a little bit easier going, it would more than likely be a place, as soon as you put your foot down, you'd be surrounded in a cloud of midges. So, you know, we kind of realised that that wasn't going to be viable in that part of the woodland. Coming back through, we did find some shotgun cases, and they did look like they were of the shot which would be used for rabbits and pigeons. There is a fact of those shotgun cartridges as well. Now, I did find some newer ones, and the size of shot indicates it is rabbit or pigeons that are actually being shot there. The thing with that is you can mitigate if you know what time of year it is, you know what's happening on the land or in the woods, you know, with like agricultural practices, you know, hunting times and seasons. You can mitigate where, when, and possibly who's going to be in that piece of ground. But somebody just out rabbiting, you know, it's on a wing and a prayer whether they decide tonight's the night they're going to go out and then stumble on you. But, you know, like I said, you can't, you know, rely on that factor. I would hesitate to actually say that it was heavily used for sporting purposes. It's quite simply because the cartridges left there, the most recent ones, were over 12 months. But, yeah, there is still somebody there hunting. So it kind of makes that woodland not so promising as I first thought. For me, if you do a 3-step plan, I mean, the first step, I've done the recce. 2, I'm assessing the information which I'm discussing with you here now. And then 3, to make a plan of action to allow me to wild camp there with that information, or for me to discount it. For me, I'm going to discount it. Quite simply, access in and out. If I got called out because I've got young kids, I have to have a clear, fast extraction route to get out. If I need to get home, I'm usually dropped off or I hike in. In any case, I have to have access to get out quick, because ultimately, you know, I'm no good to anybody if I'm stuck miles away from anywhere with no easy access out, and somebody needs to get to hospital, or quite simply, somebody needs a hand at home. But that on one side. Midges, ticks, steep ground, potentially I can be overlooked easily, possibly stumbled on by somebody hunting, you know, workmen possibly being around when I'm using the paths in and out. And if I try to extract myself out through any other route, it's just going to be extremely steep, difficult, and any place for a pickup with the car is going to be hard. So ultimately, a multitude of reasons, even though that looked like the promised land to me on maps and visually looking at it from a distance, a mile out looking at it, it's now proven to be substandard ground and not worth wild camping for myself. That's not to say somebody else wouldn't like to give it a go, but for me personally, that's not a viable piece of ground. And that's the beauty of doing a recce. I will not waste my time, energy, and I will now pursue looking for somewhere else and rely on my reliable camps that I've already got. But ultimately, you know, I'm hoping you can see the thought process between just tipping up and doing a wild camp and it being a disaster, or doing a recce and having a really good thought out, planned, and on top of that, enjoyable wild camp. This is Andy from Hidden Valley Footpaths. I hope that I actually gave something of any value there to people, and they can see how a recce can translate to actually making the decision on whether you want a wild camp or just basically pass it up. So I hope to catch you guys out on the trail. Stay safe and all the best. This is Andy. Cheers.